Have you ever noticed there is a certain kind of person who doesn't fear silence? They seek it. But the real question is this. Have you ever wondered what would truly collapse first if you allowed yourself to be seen? That connection you long for? Or the quiet internal defense mechanism that has protected you for decades? It is easy for the world to assume solitude is a sign of sadness, a symptom of brokenness, or a reflection of social withdrawal. They look at the person who chooses the corner seat at the networking event, or the one who slips away early from the crowded dinner party, and they whisper a judgment, antisocial, avoidant, cold. Yet, the quiet truth you carry, the one you can't always articulate, is that being alone carries a strange, almost necessary comfort. It's like stepping into a warm shadow that finally fits the awkward shape of your soul. This feeling is not a quirk of personality. It is a profound act of self-preservation. You carry this truth quietly because the world is so quick to misunderstand it. What they never see is the hidden electrical storm inside you. They don't register the sensitivity, the depth, the constant low-frequency hum of your mind, reading the emotional temperature of a room before anyone else has even registered the shift. They don't see the way your nervous system reacts, not just to loud noises, but to the subtle conflict, the unspoken tension, the psychological static that fills any crowded space. They don't know how heavy that constant awareness can be. For you, solitude is not an escape from life. It is a forced regulation of the chaos inside. Perhaps you've felt this yourself, on nights when the world grew too loud and the quiet room you walked into felt like a deep, soft exhale, a place where your frantic internal rhythm could finally match the pace of your own thoughts. People mistake this need for peace for fear of connection. But what they are observing is not fear. They are observing a complex, highly tuned internal system that is chronically overloaded. Some minds are simply wired to process the world more deeply. Some nervous systems react more intensely to noise, conflict, and social unpredictability. For these systems, seeking silence is not a preference. It is a biological demand. It is the necessary shutdown required to prevent total internal collapse. This is not loneliness. Loneliness is the ache you feel when you cannot connect. This is equilibrium. It is the state you seek when you finally connect to yourself. But even this necessary sanctuary carries its own complex emotional cost, because the more you retreat into it, the more the world begins to blur at the edges. The more you protect your delicate inner world, the harder it becomes to let anyone, even the gentle ones, enter it. You learn to prefer silence, but you also learn to hide inside it. And this hiding begins to carve away at the parts of you that remember how to truly feel. This story of quiet self-preservation is rooted in something much older than your adult choices. To understand why solitude feels like home, we have to look back at the first time it ever saved you. This survival mechanism did not appear overnight. It was forged in the subtle, unpredictable climate of your own childhood. Have you ever wondered when it truly began? That instinct you have to seek quiet places, to slip into solitude the way others slip effortlessly into conversation. Somewhere in your childhood, long before you possessed the vocabulary for psychology or patterns or attachment styles, you learned a fundamental, quiet, almost accidental lesson. Silence could protect you in ways that people couldn't. You were just a child, but the world around you often felt too sharp. The house didn't need to be violent, but it might have been consistently unpredictable. Voices rising without warning. Tension in the air so thick that it made your small chest tighten. Maybe nothing dramatically traumatic happened by external measures, yet everything felt emotionally unstable. The air was conditional. You learned, not through language, but through your nervous system, how to read the energy before you understood the words. You could sense when an adult was moody, when a certain storm was about to erupt, when it was simply better to disappear. And so, you did. You retreated into your room, into your drawings, or into the soft refuge of being physically alone. There is a memory you might still feel in your bones, sitting on the floor with a toy or a book, not because you were told to, but because being around people demanded an unsustainable amount of psychic energy from you. You didn't have the words to describe overstimulation or emotional absorption, but your small nervous system knew the truth. You felt everything. The disappointment behind your parents' sigh, the frustration hidden in their silence, the heaviness they tried so desperately to ignore or hide. Children wired like you don't typically rebel loudly. They retreat quietly. They become small enough to survive without making trouble. And the hardest part of this silent survival strategy is that the adults around you often praised you for it. You were easy. You were calm. You were no trouble. They loved the version of you that stayed quiet, that didn't complain, that handled their inconsistencies and the surrounding emotional turbulence with a muted maturity you were far too young to possess. Without realizing it, you learned a dangerous foundational lesson. Your needs were easier, safer to carry when you kept them completely inside. Your emotions were less risky when no one else had access to them. People applauded your quietness without ever seeing the loneliness beneath it. They celebrated the ease of your presence, unaware that they were witnessing a profound, silent act of self-sufficiency driven by necessity, not choice. Psychologists have a clinical name for this pattern, an avoidant attachment response. It describes the inner world of the child, who learns that expressing need or seeking comfort during distress brings no consistent, safe reply. Therefore, the nervous system turns inward as a reflex. Safety is outsourced from the unreliable external environment to the controlled, predictable internal one. Neuroscience confirms that these deep patterns, once established, do not simply fade away with time. The architecture of your brain wires itself around the foundational strategy for safety. And for you, safety lived in solitude. While other children ran toward noise and attention, you found a profound, dependable comfort in the quiet world you built inside your mind. Alone time was never a punishment. It was your very first necessary act of self-protection. And so, the seed was planted, the blueprint for the rest of your life drawn. The deeply ingrained idea that silence is infinitely safer than uncertainty, that your controlled inner room is more predictable than messy human emotion, and that solitude is the only place where your high-strung nervous system can finally breathe without threat. A child who grows up like this doesn't suddenly, consciously become an adult who merely loves being alone. It happens slowly, quietly, the way a shadow lengthens with the setting sun. The survival strategy simply becomes the personality. The quiet structure you built in childhood, the self-contained safety system, does not rely merely on memory or choice. It relies on cold, hard biology. Your nervous system didn't just prefer solitude. It was expertly tuned to require it. To understand why this retreat into quietness feels so necessary, we must look beneath the mask of personality and into the brain's delicate reward pathways. As an adult, you navigate rooms differently. You step into a gathering and instantly, non-consciously, sense the emotional temperature, as if your mind carries a built-in sonar for tension. You observe before you speak. You feel before you act. And most tellingly, you withdraw before the noise. The emotional noise, the sensory noise, the psychological friction inside you becomes too loud. Others mistake this for shyness or indifference. But the truth is simpler and far more mechanical. You have spent years learning how to protect the parts of yourself that the world didn't know how to hold. Your quietness is not emptiness. It is a meticulously crafted armor. The science behind this is fascinating and often overlooked. Studies on individuals with high sensory processing sensitivity, HSP, and certain forms of introversion reveal a distinct relationship with stimulation. Your brain is not better or worse than others. It is simply different. Specifically, researchers have looked at the role of the neurotransmitter dopamine. Dopamine is critical for drive, motivation, and the feeling of reward. It is what makes us seek out novel, exciting, or socially engaging experiences. For many highly sensitive and introverted individuals, the brain processes dopamine differently. While extroverted systems might crave a high volume of external dopamine hits, the constant buzz of social interaction, competition, or fast-paced change, your nervous system is often the opposite. Your brain might react too intensely to noise, chaos, and conflict, leading to rapid overstimulation. Seeking high external reward carries a higher internal cost for you. Instead of feeling energized by the social buzz, you feel a deep, swift drain on your internal battery. Your nervous system, in essence, learned to thrive in quieter spaces because that is the only place it can reliably regulate itself without fighting a constant tide of sensory and emotional input. This means your brain doesn't crave the constant external reward that society worships. It seeks internal regulation. This is the true cost of perception. Your brain processes emotional data deeply, thoroughly, and often painfully. When you step into a noisy room, the volume of the world seems to rise not just around you, but inside your chest. When someone speaks with too much intensity, you don't just hear their tone, you absorb it. This is why solitude feels so profoundly necessary. It is not running away from life. It is the complex biological act of rebalancing the system, the way a snow globe settles after being violently shaken. Psychologists describe people like you as finely tuned, not fragile. Your emotional antenna picks up signals others miss. And here lies the subtle mechanical truth of the dopamine debt. Because your system learned that safety comes from control, solitude, and unpredictability, social interaction, comes with a high biological cost. Your brain has developed a chronic avoidance habit. The consistent choice of quiet has unintentionally raised the threshold for what constitutes a truly rewarding emotional or social experience. In a world that demands noise, your internal system has become hyper-selective, almost anhedonic, toward anything that doesn't carry immense, quiet weight. You've become guarded not just against pain, but against the very possibility of spontaneous, messy joy. This quietness, this preference for solitude, creates a strange duality inside you. On the outside, you look composed, calm, often low maintenance. On the inside, you are carrying currents of perception and intuition that others simply don't see. You feel the slight, subtle shift in someone's smile before they notice it themselves. You sense when a conversation is hiding a deeper wound. You understand what isn't being said. And because of this profound level of constant absorption, solitude transitions from being a preference to becoming the only place where you are not absorbing everyone else's emotions like a sponge. But the real complexity lives in what psychologists call the control paradox. When you trace the genesis of this need for solitude back to the avoidant attachment pattern we discussed, you realize that the ultimate goal is not comfort, but control. When you grew up learning that your emotional world was entirely yours to handle alone, that expressing need brought inconsistency or no relief, your nervous system developed a powerful form of self-sufficiency. Not because you inherently distrust others, but because your entire inner architecture learned early that safety often comes from within. Completely divorced from the unreliable external world, the adult withdrawal is not avoidance of people, it is the avoidance of unpredictability. People can be loud, people can be chaotic, people can be disappointing, but your room, your mind, your carefully constructed routine, those are predictable. They adhere to your rules. They do not judge your silence. They do not demand an emotional performance. So, when the world asks, "Why don't you talk more? Why are you so distant?" they never realize that your distance is not rejection. It is a calculated, non-conscious strategy to maintain internal stability. You are not avoiding the world. You are trying to survive it without losing the fragile sense of self you built when you were forced to retreat. This is the control paradox. You are not running from danger. You are running towards certainty, and certainty in a chaotic world is the highest form of self-protection. This reflex to contain yourself, to push through every bad day, every episode of overthinking, every moment of doubt, all alone, has been perfected over years. Expressing vulnerability now feels like handing someone the blueprint to your weaknesses. Asking for help feels like stepping into an unfamiliar landscape where the rules of safety are suspended. You push through everything quietly because silence has always been your safest companion, your most reliable co-conspirator. But the weight of this self-containment adds up. It presses into your shoulders, wraps itself around your ribs, and slowly, invisibly, fills the empty spaces inside you with a tired kind of loneliness. This is the loneliness that doesn't cry out. It just lingers, like a deep shadow that has forgotten how to leave. You survive it, of course. You always do. But deep down, a profound question begins to grow in the dark, and this is where the paradox truly cuts. What if this wasn't meant to be carried alone? The strange truth is that your emotional intelligence, your ability to read tension, and your capacity for depth, the very traits that make you acutely sensitive, are also the ones that trigger the shutdown reflex, forcing you deeper into the safety of isolation. The armor you wear is gentle, but it is also isolating. and its effectiveness comes at an invisible, high cost. The paradox we have described, the constant pursuit of control for safety, leads us directly to the most subtle and damaging cost of this survival strategy. It is the core, quiet ache of a life where nothing hurts, but crucially, nothing truly thrives either. You have perfected the art of the emotional shutdown. The system you built in childhood, designed to filter out the noise and the pain, has become so ruthlessly effective that it now filters out all strong emotional signals, both positive and negative. This is where the thread of anhedonia weaves itself into your story. Anhedonia, at its heart, is the inability to experience pleasure or find joy in activities that were once rewarding. For many, it is a symptom of clinical depression, but for people shaped by chronic emotional overload and the avoidant reflex, it is often the direct, mechanical consequence of a survival strategy gone too far. We are talking about a muted existence. Think of your inner world not as a cozy sanctuary, but as an elegant, old-world library. Everything is perfectly in its place. The lighting is dim, soft, and controlled. There are no loud sounds, no unexpected movements. This is the quiet perfection you crave. But if you look closely at the books on the shelves, the memories, the passions, the spontaneous joys, you realize they are all encased in glass. They are not meant to be read or handled. They are meant to be preserved. You have successfully protected your emotional landscape from external damage, turning it into a perfectly maintained museum. And in a museum, nothing ever truly lives. This is the cost. You kept yourself safe, but you also kept yourself small. You have control, but you lack vitality. You have structure, but you lack spontaneity. The nervous system, having learned that the risk of feeling is too high, now confuses safety, control, with sameness, the muted, flat baseline. This creates the profound inner conflict that defines the high-functioning, quiet individual. You crave genuine connection, a deep, visceral aliveness, but the mechanism you use to survive prevents you from accessing the very feeling you desire. You find yourself craving conversations that have weight, exchanges that don't feel like sand slipping through your fingers. You grow restless and mentally starved when small talk drags on, not because you are superior, but because your inner world has been running on empty for so long, desperate for sustenance that matters. You watch others laugh loudly, express joy without reservation, and live loudly, and you wonder, not with envy, but with detached curiosity, how do they do it so effortlessly? For you, that kind of open, spontaneous energy feels borrowed, maybe even forced. Your peace comes from stillness, the way a forest regains its silence after a storm. But this stillness can feel less like peace and more like a quiet cessation of life itself. The quietness is not a flaw, but neither is it a purely virtuous wisdom. It is an armor, a gentle armor, yes, but armor nonetheless. An armor, by its very nature, is designed to keep things out, which means it also prevents things from getting in. This subtle emotional death is the untold story of those who prefer to be alone. We have established that the solitude you seek is an act of neurological wisdom, a necessary defense against a high-cost environment. But even wisdom can cast a profound shadow, and the very traits that saved you can slowly and quietly begin to trap you. There comes a moment, often subtle, almost invisible, when solitude shifts from being a sanctuary, a place you choose to enter, to becoming a wall you cannot pass through. It is a beautiful wall, perhaps, a peaceful wall, a familiar wall, but a wall nonetheless. You feel this shift most acutely in the in-between moments. When a message pings on your phone from a genuinely kind friend, and your mind races through 50 reasons why replying now is too complicated, too energy-consuming. You stare at the screen for an hour, telling yourself you'll reply later, but a small, honest voice knows that later may never come, because the reflex to retreat is now faster than the desire to connect. When someone tries to get genuinely close, instead of opening even a single window, your internal system automatically triggers a deep retreat back into the safety of your inner castle. This castle was not built out of bitterness or resentment. It was built stone by stone from every moment the world felt too unpredictable, every sigh that went unnoticed, every need that was dismissed. But eventually, the structure becomes so tall, so fortified, and so silent that even you forget how to step outside of it. There is a strange emotional paradox here that must be named. You crave connection deeply, quietly, almost painfully. Yet, the idea of truly letting someone in feels like handing them something too delicate, too valuable to trust to unfamiliar or clumsy hands. Your nervous system still flinches. It remembers what disappointment felt like. It remembers the acute, high-definition pain of being fundamentally misunderstood. So, instead of risking intimacy, the profound uncertainty of being known, you choose the familiar, muted rhythm of being alone, even when that loneliness aches in your chest. Psychologists might call this self-isolation, but for you, it doesn't feel like a condition. It feels like habit. It feels like an autonomic reflex, a shadow that follows you, even when you are intellectually trying to walk into the light. The very sensitivity, awareness, and emotional depth that make you capable of profound connection now whisper continuous warnings every time someone moves too close. This is the mechanical tragedy of the avoidance system. Neuroscience suggests that the brain can easily confuse safety with sameness, preferring the predictable, quiet certainty of emotional isolation to the unpredictable, messy noise of love. Inside your solitude, everything is controlled. Nothing surprises you. Nothing hurts you acutely, but nothing grows either. It is like that perfectly maintained museum we spoke of. You water the gardens with your routines, shield them from storms, and keep them perfectly arranged, yet they remain muted, dim, and only half alive. You've kept yourself impeccably safe, but you have also, through the same mechanism, kept yourself profoundly small. And the most haunting truth is this: no one knows the real you. Not because you are unlovable, but because you have perfectly archived the vital, breathing parts of yourself, the parts that demand risk, chaos, and light. This shadow is not the ending of your story, but it is the critical midpoint, the moment where the quiet becomes too heavy, the walls feel too high, and you begin to wonder what life looks like beyond the perimeter of your self-control. If solitude has become a quiet prison, what does healing look like for someone who finds peace in being alone? It is not the loud, dramatic healing the world loves to romanticize, the sudden, extroverted transformation. For you, healing isn't about abandoning solitude. It is about reshaping it, learning how to turn it back from a shield into a genuine sanctuary. There is a myth that healing means becoming someone you are not, more social, louder, universally open. This is simply the world projecting its own preference onto your unique architecture. True healing asks you only to integrate, not to replace. You begin to feel this profound shift the moment you realize that your solitude does not have to protect you from the world. It can coexist with connection, gently, slowly, and entirely on your own terms. And it starts in the smallest, most courageous moments. It might be a conversation you allow yourself to stay in just a little longer than the internal warning system dictates. It might be a complex, difficult feeling you choose not to hide or archive. It might be a small truth you speak, even though your voice trembles and your nervous system is screaming for retreat. Healing is rarely loud. It never announces itself with fanfare. It shows up like a soft, persistent light under a closed door. For you, it may even begin with one person. Someone who feels consistently safe enough that your nervous system doesn't immediately rush to build the familiar wall. Someone who listens without pushing, understands without demanding a performance, and stays present without crowding your space. You don't need to fling your heavy doors open. You simply need to crack the window. And for someone who has spent years carrying everything alone, even that fractional opening is an act of genuine foundational courage. Psychology refers to this process as earned security, the slow, gradual rebuilding of internal trust through consistent, gentle external experiences. This process is essentially rewiring your most primitive brain architecture. Your mind and heart learn, step by step, that connection doesn't always equal danger or high cost. Vulnerability doesn't always lead to acute disappointment, and letting someone see an unguarded part of you isn't the same as losing total control. Over time, this rewires you from the inside out, the way quiet roots slowly and persistently reshape the dense soil around them. You begin to recognize your needs not as heavy burdens to be archived, but as fundamental truths to be expressed. You start expressing them, not perfectly, but honestly. You learn that asking for help doesn't erase your strength, nor does choosing companionship diminish your profound love for solitude. You discover that you can step outward without abandoning your inner world. The heart doesn't have to choose between the absolute quiet of the museum and the messy chaos of the market. There is a space in between. Healing simply asks you to make room for a few meaningful threads of connection, woven carefully into the rich, intricate fabric of your solitude. You keep your quietness, your depth, and your inner sanctuary. But now, perhaps, there are a few extra chairs inside it instead of just one. And slowly, the solitude that once felt like heavy armor begins to feel like a true home. Not a hiding place you retreat to, but a space you can return to after experiencing the world, instead of escaping from it. The quiet parts of you are not taken away by this process. They are simply given light and dimension. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to move through life as if they're carrying a profound secret, a soft inner world that no one else can fully see? They walk quietly, think deeply, love gently, and disappear into silence. Not because they are afraid of the world, but because they hold entire worlds within themselves. And maybe, without fully realizing it, you have always been one of them. There is a powerful beauty in being someone who feels more than they can explain. Someone who has learned to sit with their own thoughts the way others sit with trusted friends. Someone who knows, fundamentally, that solitude is not emptiness, but a kind of profound fullness. A place where the noise of the world finally dims just enough for you to hear the quiet, honest truth you have been carrying all along. It takes a specific, quiet kind of strength to be this way. The kind that doesn't demand recognition or applause. The kind that grows like deep roots beneath the surface, holding everything together even when no one is watching. You've spent years moving between these two realities. The outer world, where people speak loudly and live quickly, and the inner world, where everything breathes slower, softer. You've learned to find meaning in the pauses, in the stillness, and in the small, unnoticed moments that most people rush past, trading depth for velocity. And though the world often misinterprets your silence as distance, or your solitude as sadness, there is a quiet truth you have always felt, but rarely say out loud. The depth inside you is not a flaw, it is your greatest gift. Neuroscience might call it a highly attuned sensitivity. Psychology might call it profound introspection. But you know it simply as you. The way your heart listens, the way your mind absorbs, and the way you can stand in a room full of people and still hear the faint, insistent echo of your own soul calling you back home. Yet, the journey you've taken, from childhood shadow to adult solitude, from building emotional walls to cautiously cracking the window, reveals something even more essential than your quiet nature. It reveals the unspoken cost. The question is not whether your solitude saved you. It did. The question is, what did it take in return? You are not silent because you have nothing to say. You are silent because you have learned to speak only when it matters, when the signal is clean and the intention is true. You are not alone because you cannot connect. You are alone because your spirit refuses to settle for surface-level living, for the easy performance. In a world that continuously demands noise, the quiet ones are often the last keepers of depth, the silent cartographers of the inner world. So, if you've ever felt different, distant, or profoundly misunderstood, remember this. Your solitude is not a weakness to outgrow. It is a fundamental wisdom you must understand, a sanctuary you must protect, and a compass pointing you inward toward the parts of yourself that were always waiting to be seen, both by you and by those you choose to invite in. The journey ahead is not about dissolving the walls, but about understanding where to place the doors. It is about integrating the wisdom of the quiet child with the courage of the vulnerable adult. As you step into the next chapter, carry this final insight with you. Solitude saved you, but only vulnerability can make you whole.